Back with you tonight on In Focus. South Africa's gross domestic product grew by 1.9% in the first quarter of 2022. The manufacturing industry grew by just under 5%. This was the second consecutive quarter of upward growth, meaning the economy is now growing at pre-pandemic levels. But Stats South Africa has warned that while manufacturing has managed to create over 183,000 jobs in the first quarter, there are still over 1 million people who lost their jobs compared to the same period before COVID-19. Joining us now for his take on what this means for South Africans buckling under the weight of spiraling costs of living and joblessness is Miyelani Maluleke, Economist at ABSA. Miyelani, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. So 8 out of the 10 sectors showing significant growth in as far as taking us back to pre-pandemic levels. The first positive news is that it is, of course, that we are back to pre-pandemic levels. Secondly, is that the predictions were that it will probably be 1.3, 1.5. We went to 1.9. It's better than that. But of course, the question is, this is movement in the macroeconomy. For people in the microeconomy who are looking for jobs, is this good news?
Yeah, I think it's a really important way of framing the issue, because economies are fundamentally about people. So while we should celebrate the fact that we seem to have had a much better than expected start to the year, we should also ask, is this necessarily creating opportunities for people? And certainly when we look at the labor market data that Stats SA itself published just last week, it's pretty clear that this stronger than expected recovery that we have seen so far has not translated into a very quick recovery in employment. We are actually still down by about 1.5 million jobs compared with where we were before the start of this pandemic. And that I think is a very significant gap for an economy that even before COVID was struggling to create employment. So it's a very good start to the year in terms of GDP growth, but I think, as you pointed out at the start, what's also going to be critical going forward, and I think also critical for employment creation, is whether this growth is sustained. And we just think that we're going to face some headwinds going forward.
The expectation was, of course, that the mining sector would do well, considering that they have been doing quite well during the pandemic. But it is a big worry. What are the factors that are leading to, I suppose, not such a great performance of the mining sector, lower outputs than what would have been ideal, let me say so?
Yeah, there's a number of factors. I mean, you pointed out at the start that 8 out of 10 sectors of the economy actually expanded. The two that did not grow in the first quarter of this year, one, mining is one of those. The second one is construction, and I'm hoping we can have a bit of time to talk about construction as well. But I think just reflecting on mining, it's very disappointing, because we did see that at the beginning of the recovery phase, from those hard lockdowns, the mining sector did lead that recovery because export commodity prices globally did pick up and certainly provided a big boost for that sector. But recently, the mining sector does seem to be struggling a little bit. And in fact, that contraction, or the decline that we had in the first quarter, was the third consecutive quarterly decline. So what are the challenges in that space? Like I said, I think there's a number of issues. And we've seen, of course, just recently, something that's been in the news a lot, the strike at Sibanye-Stillwater. We know that affected output, particularly in gold mining. The load shedding that we've had to deal with for the last little while, that hasn't been very helpful to production. But we've also had reports, from Stats SA that there are some open cast mining operations that were also affected by the heavy rainfall that we had a little bit earlier at the start of the year. And we've also had some temporary maintenance shutdown. So some of the factors that I think have negatively affected the mining sector over the last few quarters probably going to be temporary. But some of them won't be temporary. I mean, such as the difficulties with electricity supply. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate because it's affecting our ability to maximize from what is currently a favorable commodity price environment.
Yeah. Let's talk about construction. Very, very low report, underwhelming results, in fact, in the residential buildings and construction works, which one would say it's quite surprising because we've got the infrastructure fund. We thought we'll be building roads, we'll be building bridges and building schools and so on and so forth. There should be some kind of movement there because that is where we hope the recovery will be. Why is it showing a different kind of picture?
That's right. I mean, we've been talking about sort of boosting investment in infrastructure here in South Africa for quite some time. But I think the truth is that when you look at the numbers, I mean, it's just not coming through as yet. If you look at investment spending in construction works, you look at investment spending in residential buildings, that hasn't really recovered from the big drop that we saw, during the worst of COVID, and that has certainly translated into this underperformance that we're actually seeing in the construction sector. I must tell you, I mean, if you look at those the 10 sectors that we talk about here in the economy and try to look at which one is furthest away from where it was before COVID, construction is actually that sector. It's still down about 20% in terms of activity levels from its pre-COVID level. And I think that is really a direct reflection of the fact that there isn't a lot of investment spending in construction works that is taking place right now. And I think a lot of the plans that the government has been talking about in terms of driving infrastructure investment so far just hasn't come through in a big way. And I think that is certainly what we're seeing in the GDP data that we got today. And as we know, construction is one of those sectors that is very employment intensive. And I think in this environment where we're not seeing the kind of growth that we would like in construction, also means that the jobs that you tend to see in that space will also lag quite significantly.
Yeah, if you listen to the IMF, I mean, the IMF is pretty much saying to South Africa, get on with the business of reform. So you've already mentioned the downside risks, one of them being electricity. Transnet, I suppose the floods, maybe you can't say that is something that we certainly have direct influence over, but I mean, we've seen unrest, so issues around security. What are those downside risks that we can actually do something about?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good way of framing it. So there are always domestic risks. I think electricity is certainly a big one. Transnet, it's also indicated, I think, in its recent reporting that there's some issues on its rail network. Vandalism of infrastructure has become a big problem. I think it's a big risk. So I think these are the things that we have some control over. These are the things that we need to be doing something about. But at the same time, I think we have to realize that there are no quick fixes to our electricity supply problem. There are no quick fixes to some of the issues that we have in rail. These, I think, are going to take a very long time to sort out. But at the same time, I think we must also realize that we're facing an external environment, a global environment that has also become a little bit unfriendly in a way. I think over the last few months, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sent a lot of commodity prices a lot higher. I mean, the one that, of course, a lot of us will care about is the oil price, which is shot up quite significantly. We're feeling it at the pumps, all of us. It's taking away from our disposable incomes. The South African Reserve Bank has had to respond to that by hiking interest rates. That is also taking away from disposable income. And I think those factors aren't going to help South Africa's growth momentum over the remainder of the year.
Speaking of disposable income, though, household consumption is up. I mean, what's driving that household consumption, and is that sustainable?
Yeah, so we were up in Q1. It's a big positive. I mean, especially when you look at how far we dropped, during COVID. So I think that there's a number of factors here that help to explain the nature of the recovery that we've seen. One is that there was a lot of macro policy support that was in place, some of the fiscal transfers that we had, public employment programs that we put in place. But also the interest rate cuts that we had in the past. I think there were still some lingering effects that we still have sort of coming through from that. And we've also seen, and I don't think that this particular factor necessarily applies to all households in the economy, but it does look like there are some consumers who, during the worst of COVID, were actually able to save some money. And now that things are opening up, some of those accumulated savings are coming back into the economy. It's not going to be, I think, there for a very long time. The savings are not going to be there for a very long time. With the interest rate hikes that we're seeing, with inflation coming from fuel prices, coming from food prices, that's also going to take away from disposable income. And I think that's definitely going to affect the ability of consumers to continue spending going forward.
We're an economy that continues to import, and we are not seeing a lot of exports. The net exports are going down. What does that tell us about the kind of economy that we have, and what is actually happening on the ground? Yeah,
you're right. I mean, we certainly should be exporting a lot more. It's what we want to be doing, but I think, as we're just saying, that there are some clear constraints to being able to do that. I mean, if it's difficult to not just mine stuff out, but I think being able to put it on the rail and take it outside, being able to be competitive and actually having sufficient electricity to produce, it becomes very difficult, I think, for us to be competitive in global markets. So, as we know, ours is also an economy that tends to be quite import intensive, and because this demand is starting to come back a little bit, it's really not surprising that we've actually seen net exports do what it did in the first quarter. And I think over the remainder of the year, net exports is probably something that I think is going to continue to take away a little bit from growth.
Miyelani Maluleke, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on. Economist at ABSA there, breaking down those GDP numbers and what they mean to us in terms of jobs, but also in terms of growth in the future.